Welcome to this unit in which we look at the proviso provided that. This is something that we commonly see in legal writing, so what's the problem with this? As with shall, this is another word that the courts have interpreted in a number of different ways. Unlike shall, however, there is no official legal meaning for provided that, which means that we have to understand what it means based on how the courts have previously interpreted it. That is, as meaning if, except, or and. And we have nothing to help us with that except from the context with which we're presented. It will come as no surprise to find that these three different definitions, unsurprisingly, cause confusion. The other problem that we have with provided that is that it complicates sentence structure. Party A will do this, provided that party B does this, provided further that party C doesn't do that, provided that party B does this by a certain date. You can imagine what kind of monstrous sentence that would be to understand based on all of those provisos, not to mention that you then have to try and work out what all of those provided that's mean. The final issue with provided that is that it might be difficult to work out exactly which subclause or piece of information provided that actually modifies. If you come across a long sentence which carries lots of information with a provided that proviso at the end, well, which piece of prior information does it modify? All of it? Some of it? The last bit before the proviso? Which? What's the solution? We have to use one of the alternatives to provided that, if, except, or and. Or we can change the sentence structure or language which presents the information to a much clearer structure. How? Take a second to read the example sentence and ask yourself, what does provided that mean here? If, except, or and. This is a fairly simple example. The judge will review the documents on the condition that the submission is made. One thing has to be done, on the basis of that, the other thing is done. This is a simple conditional structure. As such, provided that means if. Take a second to read the example sentence and ask yourself, what does provided that mean here? If, except, or and. A good way to deal with provided that, and indeed any difficult piece of legal text, is to break the text down into its basic message. In this case, it's, if a purchaser sees something that allows it to raise a warranty claim, it must give prompt or quick notice to the seller. But if the purchaser does not give prompt or quick notice, this failure to give prompt notice does not affect the purchaser's rights. What we've done here is to create an exception which protects the purchaser's rights. In other words, it could be argued that the failure to give prompt notice, however that could be measured, might invalidate all the purchaser's rights. The exception, therefore, is needed to keep the purchaser's rights intact. Brian Garner, editor-in-chief of Black's Law Dictionary, says that if you meet a provided however that, you can imply the end of the previous sentence and start the next sentence with but. So there are two ways to deal with this example sentence. Use an appropriate word to suggest an exception, or break it into two sentences. Okay, think about this next sentence and think about what provided that means here, if, except, or and. This sentence tells us two things that have got to be done to return the item. The buyer has 14 days to return it, and that they must use a courier. This is not an exception, nor is it a conditional. The return of the item isn't based on the method used, Otherwise, you could argue that the buyer has more than 14 days if they hand deliver it or send it through regular post. Here, provided that means and. We can make this clearer by simply saying and, or in addition to, or by breaking the text down into two different sentences. Now that we've had a look at all of the definitions of provided that through examples, let's deal with another common way to deal with provided that. What I'd like you to do is read through the following passage and try to understand the basic message. Find the proviso in the text and work out what it means. Okay, if we think about the basic message, we discover two things. One, provided that means if, and secondly, we can break down this passage in a much easier way. It contains a number of points, and as we'll see in a future unit, a great way to deal with the number of points is to tabulate. If we do that, we might get this. Provided that structures often deal with numerous points, often buried in the text. If we restructure the text using tabulation, in this case using bullet points, we make the message clear and precise, and for the reader, very easy to read. Okay, let's recap. Don't use provided that. Use if, except, and, or another language alternative which communicates one of those three options. And two, if the sentence deals with multiple points, either tabulate or refer back to Unit 2 regarding sentence structure to communicate your message in a much clearer way. Okay, now we know what the problem is, why it is a problem, and how to fix the problem, we can now test the rule by doing the questions below. However, if you are unsure about any of the points which I've made, please go back and watch the video again. Feel free to pause the video to review all the examples at your own speed. After you do a question below, you can click to see a suggested answer. Just before you get started, please note the following. Please read the question and the hint carefully to make sure you complete the questions properly. Don't just get stuck into the questions, read what you have to do first. In the suggested answer, there may also be further comments to a question, so please read these carefully as well. The suggested answers are just that, suggested. There may be other also correct ways to answer each question. I've tried to put in as many variants as I can, but for obvious reasons I can't write every single correct answer, so as long as your answer follows the main points highlighted in the suggested answer, your answer should be okay. The questions are designed to practice the rule in this unit, so although you can make further corrections to the rest of the text based on the other rules in this course, the answer only concentrates on the rule presented in this unit. And finally, please don't get lost in the legalities of the question text. It's there only to provide material to practice the rule, not to be a law lesson. All that being said, off you go.